Hey, so Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So we're reading from Canto 2, Chapter 9, which is entitled Answers by Citing the Lord's Version. Text 35. Yata Mahanti Bhutani
Yatamahanti Bhutani
Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu
Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu
Pravishtani
Pravishtanya Pravishtani
Tatateshu Nateshvaham
Tatateshu Nateshvaham
Yata Mahanti Bhutani
Tatamahanti Bhutani
Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu
Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu
Pravishtanya Pravastani
Pravishtanya Pravishtani
Tatateshu Nateshvaham
Tatateshu Nateshvaham
Yata Mahanti Bhutani
Yatamahanti Bhutani
Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu
Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu
Pravishtanya Pravastani
Pravishtanya Pravishtani
Tatateshu Nateshvaham
Tatateshu Nateshvaham Yatamahanti Bhutani Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu Pravishtanya Pravishtani Tatateshu Nateshvaham
Yatama anti bhutani
Yatamahanti Bhutani
tesu chavasesvanu
Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu
pravistania pravistani
Pravishtanya Pravishtani
tatateshu nateshvaham
Tatateshu Nateshvaham
Yatamahanti Bhutani
Yatamahanti Bhutani
Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu
Bhuteshu Chavacheshvanu
Pravisanya Pravistani
Pravishtanya Pravishtani
Tatateshu Nateshvaham
Tatateshu Nateshvaham Okay, would anyone else like to chant the verse? This is Canto 2,
Anyone
chapter,
else?
text 35.
Okay, so we'll read the word for word, the translation, and we're going to read the second half of the purport.
Ghanashyam, it seems that your sound and video aren't coming through so well. Hare Krishna. Are you hearing me?
Oh,
Yeah, your sound's not coming through so well.
um,
Okay, let's see if he comes back on. Okay, well, hopefully Ghanashyam Prabhu will come back on, but we can go through the word for word. Yata,
Yata,
just as,
Mahanti,
the universal,
the universal,
Bhutani,
Bhutani,
elements,
elements,
Bhuteshu Ucha Avacheshu,
Jeshu, Avachat, Jeshu,
in the minute and gigantic,
in the minute and gigantic,
Anu,
Anu,
after,
after,
Pravishtani,
Avistani,
entered,
entered,
Apravishtani,
Apravishtani,
not entered,
not entered,
Tata,
Tata,
so,
so,
Teshu,
Jeshu,
in them,
in them,
Na,
na,
not,
not,
Teshu,
Jeshu,
in them,
in them,
Aham,
myself.
myself. Translation. O Brahma, please know that the universal elements enter into the cosmos and at the same time do not enter into the cosmos. Similarly, I myself also exist within everything created, and at the same time I am outside of everything. So Ghanashyam was here for a second and he left. Not sure what's happening. Okay, well, so hopefully Ghanashyam will come back. And so I'm going to continue in the purport from where we left off yesterday. And that's the paragraph that begins, the Lord can award anyone and everyone liberation. So yesterday we read the purport till there and discussed it. So the Lord can award anyone and everyone liberation, mukti, from the bondage of material existence. Yet he rarely awards the privilege of love of Godhead, as confirmed by Narada, muktim dathati karhi chit smana bhakti yogam. This transcendental devotional service of the Lord is so wonderful that the occupation keeps the deserving devotee always wrapped in psychological activities without deviation from the absolute touch. Thus, love of Godhead developed in the heart of the devotee is a great mystery. Brahmaji previously told Narada that the desires of Brahmaji are never unfulfilled because he is always absorbed in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, nor has he any desire in his heart save and except the transcendental service of the Lord. That is the beauty and mystery of the process of Bhakti Yoga. As the Lord's desire is infallible because he is achyuta, similarly the desires of the devotees in the transcendental service of the Lord are also achyuta, infallible. This is very difficult, however, for the layman to understand without knowledge of the mystery of devotional service, as it is very difficult to know the potency of touchstone. As touchstone is rarely found, a pure devotee of the Lord is also rarely to be seen, even amongst millions of liberated souls, Kotishvapi Mahamuni. Out of all kinds of perfections attained by the process of knowledge, yoga perfection in devotional service is the highest of all and the most mysterious also. Even more mysterious than the 8 kinds of mystic perfection attained by the process of yogic performances. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, text 64, the Lord therefore advised Arjuna, about this bhakti yoga. Sarva guya tamam bhuya shrinume paramam vacha. Just hear from me again about the most confidential part of the instructions in Bhagavad Gita. The same was confirmed by Brahmaji to Narada in the following words. Idam Bhagavatam nama ayanme bhagavato ditam sangrahoyam vibhutinam tvam etad vipulikuru. Brahmaji said to Narada, whatever I have spoken to you about the Bhagavatam was explained to me by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and I am advising you to expand these topics nicely so that people may easily understand the mysterious Bhakti Yoga by transcendental loving service to the Lord. It is to be noted here that the mystery of Bhakti Yoga was disclosed to Brahmaji by the Lord himself. Brahmaji explained the same mystery to Narada, and Narada explained it to Vyas. Vyas explained it to Shukadev Goswami, and that same knowledge is coming down in the unalloyed chain of disciplic succession. If one is fortunate enough to have received the knowledge in the transcendental disciplic succession, surely he will have the chance to understand the mystery of the Lord and that of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the sound incarnation of the Lord. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Ghanashyam Prabhu, if you'd like to continue from here.
Thank you, Prabhu. Sorry for dropping off. I changed computers, so hopefully we're okay.
Jai.
Okay, so just Om Gyantimarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatan Sahagana Raganatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinu Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanjana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasade Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So nice to be with all of you this morning. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, entitled Answers by Citing the Lord's Version. Text 35, I'll just read this text again. O Brahma, please know that the universal elements enter into the cosmos and at the same time do not enter into the cosmos. Similarly, I myself also exist within everything created, and at the same time, I am outside of everything. So this is a well-known section of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We're hearing about the origin of the Srimad Bhagavatam in 4 verses. These are 4 seed verses from which everything else is expanded. And Krishna himself is answering 4 questions that were asked by Brahma, and now he's giving his answers. So we're so fortunate because with no qualifications, we're hearing what Lord Brahma heard. And Lord Brahma was able to hear this directly from the Lord after performing austerities for so many years. The Lord was very pleased with him and appeared before him. And it says that he shook his hand. He revealed the whole spiritual world. He revealed his eternal nature to Lord Brahma. And then Lord Brahma asked some questions, and then these are the responses to those questions, spoken directly by Krishna himself. So it's amazing that we're able to listen in on this conversation without being qualified. Lord Brahma was so qualified to receive these answers directly from the Lord, and we're just hearing them by the mercy of Guru Parampara. As mentioned in the purport, the mercy of the Parampara, that this has been passed on for so long, and then here we are today, looking into this conversation, the questions and answers between Lord Brahma and Lord Krishna. So it's quite amazing. This section is called the Chatur Shloki Bhagavatam, the 4 seed verses of the Bhagavatam. And the Krishna in text 31, he explains, he gives a little description of what he's going to speak on, 4 subjects, actually. So that's in text 31. He's going to speak about Jnanam, knowledge, Vijnanam, realization, Sarahasyam, the great secret, and Tat Angam, which means, the Prabhupada explains, Tat Angam means like the process of achieving this secret. The verse we're covering today, 35, the topic for those are the 4 subjects that Krishna introduces in text 31. And in today's verse, 35, we're directly dealing with Sarahasyam, the great secret. What is that great secret? So these, I was looking at some commentary also because this is a famous section and there are extensive commentaries by the acharyas on these 4 verses. And these 4 subjects, Jnanam, Vijnanam, Sarahasyam, and the process, they're also sometimes explained in 3 categories. Prabhupada explains in one place to every philosophy should have a full explanation of these 3 categories: Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Right, so Sambandha means knowledge, the knowledge of the different relationships. What is my relationship to the material energy? What is my relationship to God? What is my relationship to other living beings? So the knowledge of relationships, Sambandha. Prayojana means what is the ultimate goal? What is the goal of life? What is the goal of this philosophy, of this knowledge? And that's said to be pure love for Krishna. And then Abhideya means, okay, then what are the means? What's the way to actually achieve that goal? So you need these 3 things always: knowledge, the goal, what is the goal, and what is the process to attain that goal. That's a complete philosophy. I was hearing Prabhupada the other day, and he mentioned that, he said, we're in this, I guess the devotees had purchased a church and turned it into a Krishna temple. So he was saying, so we have purchased this church. Formerly it was a church, but it was closed because they have lost the science. And we again are reestablishing the science. So we see there's a science, there's Sambandha Gyan, there's knowledge of the different relationships, how everything works. There's a science, there's a process You see, religion, when those things are taken away, when the science is taken away, or when it's lost, it becomes a little sentimental. So you come to the religious place, you hope for the best, you attend a service, and you leave, and that seems like enough. It's a kind of piety, of course, it's good, but we also need the knowledge, the science of the process, metaphysics. All this is necessary. You know, like it says that we should, in the Bible, it says that we should love our enemies. That's a very wonderful, amazing teaching. But then the question from us should be, how? How do I do that? How do you love your enemies? Right? It's not that we just come and we sit in a, you know, in a part of some organization, or we sit in a religious facility and someone just tells us all these things we should do. And then we just try to do them. But the problem is our starting point is the false ego. So the false ego can't actually do those things. The false ego can't love his or her enemies. We can only try, we kind of imitate it, we try our best, but we see that we're not actually changing by doing so. So how to actually love enemies? That's a great science, and it requires these three things: sambandha gyan, knowledge of relationship between the Lord and the creation, between myself and the creation, abhideya, the process, the science of the process of devotional service, and then achieving the ultimate goal. So text 35, which we're looking at, is, again, the subject is Sarahasyam, the great mystery. Prabhupada mentions mystery many times in this purport, right? And a mystery, it's not unknowable. It means something hidden and sublime. It means something with unlimited depth. It's mysterious. The depth of it is unlimited. It doesn't mean you can't know it. So mystery doesn't mean unknown, but it's something very sublime, something very hidden. There's an interesting verse I was looking at. This is Krishna in the 11th canto. And he says, if anybody's interested, this is 11th canto, 21st chapter, 35th verse. But Krishna tells Uddhava in this verse that the truth of the Vedas is sometimes given in a hidden form. And Krishna says, and this pleases me very much. That was very interesting. The verse says, the Vedas, divided into three divisions, ultimately reveal the living entity as pure spirit soul. The Vedic seers and mantras, however, deal in esoteric terms. And I also am pleased by such confidential descriptions. So confidential, secret, a mystery that's also given when we look at the scripture. Certain things are given in a hidden way, and Krishna is saying this is very pleasing to him. Why would that be pleasing to Krishna? Again, it reminds me of Jesus was approached once and asked, why do you speak in parables? And his response was that, see, a parable is very interesting. You're speaking in a kind of hidden way. And if you don't really care, you'll think what's being spoken is nonsense. Why is Jesus speaking about mustard seeds and vineyards and all these things, you know, all these parables that he spoke on? But if you're very eager to know the inner meaning, then you'll listen very carefully, and then it will be revealed very deeply what's actually there. He's not actually talking about vineyards and mustard seeds, literally, but he's pointing to something else. And so parable is very interesting because it conceals for some, but it reveals to others. So if if anybody just hears it and already doesn't have faith, it will just be nonsense. Why is he speaking this nonsense? That's why the disciples asked Jesus, why are you speaking in parables? And he said, for those that can hear will be able to hear. And for those who can't hear, it means spiritually hearing, then it will all be hidden. It will be protected in a sense. Right? So when you speak in this way, it kind of conceals something and it protects something. But if you're very eager to know, then you'll search your heart. You'll hear very attentively. And then so much is there within that, analogy or parable, whatever it may be. So much information is actually there. And interestingly, Madhvacharya also, he says that every word in the Vedic literature has 3 levels of meaning. And he gives the example of the word Agni. When we hear the word Agni, it means fire. So he says when Agni is being spoken of, we can think of just the fire as we know it. You burn, a fire burning here. He said so that's one level, the worldly level. And then Agni also means the demigod Agni. He is the god of fire. He is, in one sense, someone who has a higher perspective or vision. When they see fire, even fire on this earth, they understand in a certain way, they're seeing Agni, the god of fire. So he says there's a worldly level, there's a celestial level to every word, he says. And then Agni also means Vishnu himself. It means the source of the fire, the demigod. Where's this power actually ultimately come from? It's actually a name of God, Agni. It's not just a demigod, but it's a name directly of Vishnu. So he says in the same way, every word in the Vedas has 3 levels of meaning. It has the material, perspective. From our level, we see something. It also has a celestial level. A demigod is connected to it, and some can actually see that and know that. And then one who has the highest spiritual vision, they see everything as a manifestation of God and God's power. And so they're seeing God in everything. So what is this great mystery in this verse? It just seems like it seems like a philosophical verse, right? But there's a mystery there. And of course, Srila Prabhupada is kind of like, he always takes this role of something like a plot spoiler. He kind of gives the answer immediately always. It's sometimes like it's building up this point. What is this mystery? But actually Prabhupada gave it as soon as this conversation started. He gave it in the purport to text 31. He said, this mystery is called love of God. This is the mystery that's actually in this verse, although it's not so apparent. I remember reading Bhagavad Gita for the first time, and I didn't know the story at all. So I was eager to hear how things unfolded. It starts off on the battlefield, all these warriors, all their names are given. But, Srila Prabhupada in the first purport, the second purport, he says something like, all of this is leading to the ultimate conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, which is surrender to God. He tells that Krishna, that Arjuna ultimately fights. All the information is given in the very beginning. So that's why I say something like a plot spoiler, because he's not so concerned with things just gradually unfolding that we can, there's something to that gets us eager maybe for an answer. But Prabhupada is the urgency that we just know what the essence is from the very beginning, and keep emphasizing that essence again and again. Put it everywhere. Put it in the first purport. Put it in every purport. Right. So if we just look at these verses, it's like, we're hearing about this mystery that's hidden in there, but Prabhupada has mentioned it everywhere in this section. The mystery is love of God. And Jiva Goswami, he says also this verse that we're looking at, text 35, hints at pure love of God. And without it, one cannot actually give up Maya, he says. Without this pure love of God actually awakening inside of us, some experience of it, then one cannot actually give up Maya, illusion. And, it's mentioned, we have these outer senses. We hear so much about trying to control ourselves, sense gratification. We have the outer senses, and sometimes we can hold back from sense gratification. But it's also said that there are inner senses. So when we talk about our senses, my eyes see. So I can close my eyes and not see things that distract me. But there's still the inner sense, the desire to see. And all the senses are like that. So we can kind of sometimes suppress ourselves and stop our outer senses from, removing them from the sense objects, right? I can just decide to be in a particular place that protects me, say, from seeing so many things that are distracting or whatever it may be. But still the inner desire, the inner longing remains. That's what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, right? And that can never be overcome by us. But by, as Krishna says in the Gita, by experiencing the higher taste, the higher experience, the higher energy of the Lord, by experiencing that, then one can give up even the inner longing of the senses. And that's the only way. So we do the best we can for now, right? We're trying to control our senses, our mind, but it's only the higher that can help us give up the lower completely. So therefore, Jiva Goswami is mentioning that this verse is hinting at pure love of God, and it's actually, one cannot give up Maya without this secret, without attaining this secret. So this higher taste, this higher divine energy, somehow we have to become receptive to it. You could sum up Krishna consciousness very simply in that way. It's the art of achieving receptivity to the higher divine energy. Because we can't just manifest the higher energy, but by humbly associating with the higher energy. And that higher energy comes through Guru, the sound vibration, comes through the name of Krishna, acts of devotional service, through hearing Bhagavatam. So humbly associating with that higher energy, that we open our hearts, faith, Shraddha. Faith is the connecting point to the higher energy. Between the lower and the higher, you need something called faith. What is that? It's the very first opening of love of God. In its very first opening stage, something in us just longs for that, wants that, desires to know God, desires to serve God. And when we hear and chant with that, remembering that we have that, that's why we're here. That's why we continue to come. That's why we're attracted. So when we hear and chant, remembering that's inside of us and that's very sacred. And then we can receive, we can have experiences, the power of the Bhagavatam, the power of the holy name. All of that can come through to us. And when that happens, our consciousness begins to expand more and more. That we see more and more. We know more and more. Our consciousness right now is very restricted. It's within the three modes of nature. So the mode of tamas, ignorance, the consciousness is very constricted. It's very closed. In the mode of passion, the consciousness expands a little more. It's very agitated. And then the mode of goodness, the consciousness expands further. But that's all still within the material modes of nature. And there's no way that it can expand further unless the spiritual energy comes into it, into that consciousness. Actually, I was hearing recently the word sukha. Sukha means happiness, right? But if you look at the Sanskrit literally, ka means is another word for akash, space. And sukha, good, su means good, good space. And the way it's described in one place is that an expansion takes place, akash, right? Even within our subtle body, in the mind, when the mind actually expands a little, sukha, within the space, that is actually what happiness is. It's when you are able to expand your mind to a little bit more. That's actually what happens, physically. We can't see it, of course. This is all in the subtle body, but there's a slight expansion, sukha, and that gives happiness because the mind expands a little bit. And when the mind closes more and more and gets very close, that's tamas, that will be unhappiness. So somehow happiness is related. If you can actually see what's happening in the subtle body, if you could see it with our eyes, yogis can see it. This is called yoga ja. This knowledge is born from the practice of yoga. Yogis can actually see that when a person suddenly becomes happy, something good comes into their life, on the subtle level, their mind at that point expands slightly. And then again, it closes. And that's the frustration of life, because that's only a moment. A moment of sense gratification even gives some some little opening, some little expansion. But then it closes again, and that becomes frustrating because then we seek it again. I need that expansion again, open again, and then close and open and close. And this is frustrating. And eventually one seeks, what is the full expansion of consciousness? What is the process? What is the science of achieving that? So just went off in a different direction on that point. I just thought it was interesting, this sukha and the relation to the expansion of the mind. But as we receive the spiritual energy, then this is actually what breaks, it expands further out of the modes of nature, and one starts to get experiences that are beyond the modes of nature. So devotees, because their consciousness has expanded, they see so much more, and we have to hear from them. There's something also called causal closure. Have you ever heard this term, causal closure? That when we're looking at the problems in the world, we look for the cause, but seeing what the cause is actually dependent on the expansion of your consciousness. Therefore, we all point to some cause, and somebody points to one a little bit deeper, but no one can go the deepest unless the consciousness expands. I'll give an example. So, someone has a problem and they think, well, my problem is this person because they just did this or said that. That's where I close off. I'm looking for the cause. I close it off right there. And that's the limit of my understanding of what's happening. That person is the cause. And someone will say, well, that person was a product of this and this group, or maybe it's this group that's the cause. And someone looks for the problem there. And someone says, well, actually, it's not the group. If you look at it further, it's the government. I don't know. I'm just making things up, The government is actually a cause because they're creating a situation in which people are born and they get conditioned in that way. And someone else says, we're all looking for the cause here, right? And they're going a little further back. Someone else says, yeah, but the government, what is the government? It's actually these corporations that are behind the government. That is the cause. And that's where I put all my energy. That's where I fight my battle. Somebody fights the battle with a person, somebody with a group, with a government, with the corporations. Somebody says, it's not it's the banks. It's these few banks. They go a little further. But because our minds are locked within the three modes of nature, we don't see causes that are outside of this material energy. There's a closure, causal closure. So we close it, somebody closes it here, somebody closes it a little further, somebody closes it a little further. But when the consciousness expands, devotees teach us and tell us that actually the cause of these problems, they're within your own consciousness, contaminated consciousness. The karmic reactions that are coming. Wow, this is such a powerful realization, because if it means if I, in a certain way, I take care of what I need to take care of on the material level, but let me put most of my focus on my own consciousness and purifying that. And even there, some people, even maybe some psychologists, psychiatrists will say, yes, it's the mind, and you have all these little imperfections, but that's also not deep enough. We're not meant to overcome our unlimited imperfections. We're meant to see what's caused all those imperfections as well. What has caused all of these little bad habits that I have and tendencies of the mind? The devotees reveal that if you go further back, then at some point the living entity, the root cause, the original cause of all of this, of even the material world, is that the living entity has turned away from Krishna. So finally, when you can identify the root of it all, then you can put your focus there and you take care of other things as well. But this is really where it's at. And then therefore the whole goal of my life is to turn my attention back to Krishna. Love of God is very advanced. At least I think in my stage, I think of, well, for me, love of God means turning my attention back to Krishna again and again as much as I can. Just again, returning to Krishna. Okay, hearing about Krishna, chanting. It's the turning of attention back to Krishna. So in my stage, that's kind of how I see love of God. If you love someone, you give them attention, right? You give them focus. You care. You give your consciousness. So this expansion of consciousness, the devotees reveal, the Bhagavatam reveals really what is the, behind all of this is the cause of all causes, Krishna. Krishna is behind everything. He is at the root. And within my consciousness, there's been a turning away, and now there needs to be a turning back. And that is the essence. That's the only purpose of life, is to do that. Okay, then back into the verse, text 35. So Krishna here, he's giving an example first. He says, basically he's saying, just as the principal elements of creation go into certain objects, they are outside of me as well. So in other words, the principal elements of creation, say for example, water. So there's water inside of me, right? I'm made of primarily water, but the element of water is also outside of me. So the entirety of the element water is outside, but it also comes within objects. It's within me, right? So Krishna is giving this as an example. And he says, similarly, I also exist within everything, and simultaneously, I am outside of everything. Now, how is this related to the Rahasyam, the secret of love of God? It just seems like a profound philosophical point, right? So, but it's described that this vision and experience that God is everywhere, he's outside of us, and he's also within our hearts at all times. It's only given to one who possesses this Rahasyam. It's only given, this experience and vision is only given to one who has this Rahasyam, this love for God. And then they have this experience. And so that's why it said that this is kind of hinting towards something much more profound, this idea of love of God. If you actually have love of God, you will see Krishna everywhere. This is kind of the connection here. And therefore in the purport, if you look at the purport, Prabhupada quotes two verses, at least two verses from Brahma Samhita. One verse is about the Lord being the Lord of Goloka. He is in his spiritual abode. And then the next verse, Premanjana Churita Bhakti, and he's also within the hearts of the living being, always interacting in the heart of the one who has their eyes smeared with the ointment of love. If there's love, then one will see Krishna everywhere. He's outside it. He has his spiritual abode, and he's also inside the heart. I remember once some journalist asked Srila Prabhupada, if you're speaking God, so much about God, have you ever seen God? I like Prabhupada's response. He said, first of all, try to understand what is God. This is nice because instead of just giving an answer, Prabhupada's trying to teach. This is compassion. He's trying to get that person who asked the question a little further. It starts with knowledge. First of all, you're asking if I've seen God. Do you even know what God is? Start there. Try to understand what is God. We are explaining what is God. Understand that first. So that person was a little persistent and said, yes, I'll try to understand God, but have you ever seen God? I still want to know. And Prabhupada said, another interesting response, if I tell you, will you believe me? Well, that's interesting too, right? Because again, instead of just giving an answer, what's the point if we hear an answer to that question, right? If we don't have an experience ourselves, what's the point? Oh, I believe you, I don't believe you. It's very superficial. But Prabhupada was still checking. I will give you an answer, but will you believe it? So long we're in material consciousness, we only really have, when we hear something transcendental, we really only have two alternatives: to either superficially believe it or superficially reject it. The real thing is we should seek the experience and then we can know. But without that experience, at least we should find bona fide sources, those that we trust in, those that we have faith in, a pure devotee of the Lord. When we see their example, their life, we think, here's a person I can put my trust in. Let me hear what this person says above anyone else. So we take that position. We hear from the right source. And we also want to experience what the right sources have experienced. Otherwise, the belief in them also could be, someone can just very quickly decide to believe everything. And someone can very quickly decide to reject everything. In one sense, both of them are very external. So anyway, Prabhupada asked, if I tell you the answer that I've seen God to this question, have I seen God, will you believe me? And this person said, yes. And Prabhupada said, I am seeing God at every moment. Seeing God everywhere, at every moment. You see, this is connected to this verse. The secret of the heart of a pure devotee who has pure love for God is seeing Krishna everywhere, outside and inside at every moment. And again, this conversation with the journalist, then Prabhupada's next remark was also very sweet. And he said, he was kind of humble and said, but this is not so special that I can see. You can also see God. Again, it's like almost treating this journalist like a disciple, some random journalist with a few questions and then they move on with their life. But first know what is God. And now here he's saying, but you can also see. Do you want to see God face to face? You can also see him. You know? So compassion, this compassion Prabhupada with a journalist was giving, even though the person didn't perhaps really want it, Prabhupada was willing to give the method and encourage, you can see God too. It's not just me. So that's Krishna consciousness, that imagine being in a state of consciousness where, and Lord Chaitanya says in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that when a devotee looks upon something moving, something movable or immovable, they're only seeing Shyam Sundar. They're seeing their beautiful Lord, Krishna, everywhere. It's very mysterious, right? This is a great mystery. How, by looking at objects in this material world, a devotee is actually seeing beautiful Krishna everywhere. And within their heart also, they're always seeing Krishna. There are a few verses I also wanted to just read, and then we can stop for some comments or questions, but there's a few more verses I wanted to look at because, again, this text 35 is commented on also in the Chaitanya Charitamrita by Krishnadas Kaviraj. And he gives it this bhakti perspective as well. And I wanted to read what he says because it reveals further this point of the secret of seeing Krishna everywhere. So let me see, find this verse. This is Madhya Lila. Text 125. Actually, this is Lord Chaitanya speaking to Prakashananda Saraswati. And he's explaining to him these 4 verses in the Bhagavatam, these 4 seed verses in the Bhagavatam. And he says, the 5, so now this is another kind of translation of this same verse. Lord Chaitanya is speaking this to Prakashananda Saraswati. He says, the 5 material elements are existing inside and outside of every living entity. Similarly, I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, am manifest within the heart of the devotee as well as outside his body. And he says, a highly elevated devotee can bind me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in his heart by love. Wherever he looks, he sees me and nothing else. So this is Lord Chaitanya's an explanation of the same section that we're studying. And he continues to explain to Prakashananda Saraswati. A person advanced in devotional service sees within everything the soul of souls, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Consequently, he always sees the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the cause of all causes and understands that all things are situated in him. And then he gives an example of the gopis who have this consciousness. He says, all the gopis assembled to chant the transcendental qualities of Krishna very loudly, and they began to wander from one forest to another like mad women. They began to inquire about the Lord who is situated in all living entities, internally and externally. Indeed, they even asked all the plants and vegetables about him, the Supreme Person. So again, these are devotees that are seeing the Supreme Lord everywhere. And one more verse. This is back in the Bhagavatam in the 10th canto. And this is Krishna speaking to the gopis. 10:47-29. And it's also connected to today's verse because the Lord says here, he tells the gopis, you are never actually separated from me, for I am the soul of all creation. just as the elements of nature, ether, air, fire, water, and earth, are present in every created thing, so I am present within everyone's mind, life, air, and senses, and also within the physical elements and the modes of material nature. So Krishna here is also telling the gopis that I am everywhere. I'm also within you, I'm also outside of you. So this is just, these are just some thoughts on this. You know, I looked at the verse last night. I thought, let me look at the verse before going to sleep. And I realized, oh my God, this is such a philosophical, difficult section of the Bhagavatam. But I enjoyed looking up some of this information, the connection to this verse. And it was, so I appreciate the opportunity, dear Govinda Prabhu, and helping me to stay Krishna conscious by absorbing myself in some of these beautiful verses and this beautiful point and purport by Srila Prabhupada. So we'll stop here. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Any comments, thoughts, questions?
Hare Krishna, thank you, Ghanashyam Prabhu. I'm moved to go more fully into the essence of the philosophy by your presentation, Hare Krishna. And I like where you went with parables and Krishna being pleased when the Vedas get at things maybe through metaphor or subtlety, because it's kind of like a screening process. I really like that. And yesterday in our class and discussion, we were emphasizing that like, well, like even in all of our Sattva programs, whether seminars or coaching or coach training, it's all about supporting people, starting with ourselves, to peel off the layers of superfluousness and get to the essence. It's all about that. And it's no small thing or just, oh yeah, because Anandini asked which chapter in Madhila. I think you were talking about chapter 25.
Yes.
Chapter 25, yes. Because Lord Chaitanya also speaks to Prakshananda Saraswati in chapter 7 of the Adi Leela of Chaitanya Charitamrita, and then again in chapter 25 of the Madhya Leela. And so I'm thinking also, it's the same word as text 31. Krishna says to Arjuna, Bhaktosi me sakacheti rahasyam yetarutamam. Same word, mystery. So you can understand this mystery because you're living in the essence, in the foundation of all existence, friendship with Krishna, devotional service. That's the substratum of all existence, that transcendental bhakti yoga. And so like if we're living with masks, we're living superfluous, then actually it's a very miserable existence. It's hollow, it's shallow, it's and then it's depressing, and then we need to numb the fact that we're desperate. And so for like even in just basic personal growth, self-development, like actual fulfillment comes when we're sincere to get to the essence. What's a game? What's a facade? Who am I really? Authenticity. And as we were discussing yesterday, Mother Malini made the point that, yeah, even if we support someone to look at where I'm playing victim consciousness and open up to a stance of personal responsibility, we can say, well, that's personal growth stuff. It's psychology. Really, it leads to self-realization and super soul realization. And meaning to get to the essence of who I'm not, who I am as spirit, not matter. And then even further to the essence, even further, the most subtle, super soul, or even more to the source of that, Bhagavan realization. And then and I appreciate what you said. I was very moved by that excerpt from the dialogue with the reporter, and very, very powerful. The Prabhupada is very powerful, obviously. And then the way you presented it I found it very salient. And so I just heard a lecture recently where Prabhupada says, it's kind of like obvious, but he specifically says, when we say see, we mean to realize. When we say see, we mean to realize. And so to realize the foundation, the essence of all existence, the personality of Godhead, Vasudev, at every moment, in every atom, in the hearts of all living entities, then that's happiness. And I like also the happiness, sukha, good space, and dukkha, bad space, like that. Very, very nice. So yeah. So this see God. It's like, yeah, it's like, I thought, because I can say, like, have I seen God? If we put it to a yes or no, and it could get superfluous. I really appreciated how you went there. And like, okay, like I've got like a few drops, but I can say for sure, I have enough experience to say for complete confidence, this process works, because my realization of God is so much more palpable and developed than it was before I started this process 40 years ago or so. And realization of God in the oneness of energies, and at least intellectually, the personality, and in realizing myself as not the body, like, just a few glimpses, but enough to know, oh, this process works. And I like how you went there, that, yeah, it's about, okay, we can say, the example you gave, love your enemies. Oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. But unless we're in a process where I'm clearing the envy in my heart and clearing the pettiness, then it's just some sort of trite platitude. And so this is so the process actually works for transformation of heart. Thanks for your class.
Thank you, Prabhu, for everything you shared and developed there.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, I appreciate also the inspiration that you have sharing these things, and just your own path and the path that you've been on towards Krishna. You've maintained an amazing, enthusiasm and inspiration. And I think that says definitely is proof that the experiences you're having are very real. And yeah, it's nice to hear from you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. I was just connecting with your sharing about the consciousness expanding. And it seems like, and I was just kind of discussing with Danielle, she was mentioning how a body emotion will stay in motion. And it's the idea that if our consciousness either expanding or contracting, if we're endeavoring or not endeavoring to develop love of God. And one of the verses we read yesterday, it was talking about people who jeer at Krishna, who consider Krishna's body material. And it said there at the very last line of the purport, perpetually their real knowledge will remain under delusion, and gradually they will regress to the darkest region of creation. So I was really thinking about that line when you were sharing about how, from a desire to love God, our consciousness expands and we're able to see and and experience happiness, and from the, it seems like the opposite is also happens if we are envious in our hearts.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, if we close our minds, it's like we have that choice, that don't we want the mind to open and expand? And like you were saying, if we just consider Krishna, um, some people think Krishna is just again, a material form, or but to kind of to hear from good sources, from pure sources with an open mind, and just that opening, that decision, just to stay open to the possibility. And then so much gets filled up and we see more and more, and the expansion takes place in our mind gradually. So again, that's faith, right? It's something in us that says, well, it's kind of like a humility. Like, what do I know really? What do I know? If I say yes or no too early, it's all superficial. If I say Krishna's God, Krishna's not God, immediately, in one sense, they're both kind of, but if I say, well, I don't know, what do I know? Not much at all. I cannot see much. I cannot know much. I have so many limitations, but I want to know. So therefore I'll open myself to the possibility because I want to know. So when someone, rejects from the beginning, actually what they're revealing is that they don't care to know. They're not actually sincere in their desire to know. And then we come up with different reasons why we don't believe. They kind of like, if we're there's something in us right away that's blocked and doesn't want to know and is closed off, and then we disbelieve and we give so many reasons for disbelieving. But if you really want to know something and it's beyond you, we're told that God is beyond, but I want to know, so let me now be part of this process and open myself up and hear, and then it happens. It begins to happen from that opening of the consciousness, the faith. Like, if somebody tells you that on this particular street you're going to see a beautiful church, so the person may respond by saying, I don't believe you. I don't believe there's a church on that street. And another person may say, oh, I believe you, but then also do nothing about going to see it or find out. So really, how deep is their belief? But the sincere person thinks, okay, you're saying that, I want to find out now if it's there. So what's the address? Give me the address. I'm going to go there. I'm going to start walking there. And they come along the corner, they come to a street, and they see the church. So the sincere person is one that just doesn't also just say, yes, I believe, but now let me go and find out. And only that person can have the experience if it's actually there or not. So same thing with God. Some people say God exists, some people say God doesn't exist. Both can be it could be a manifestation of the modes in both ways. I believe it. It makes me feel good to believe it. I hope that he's there after I die, those kind of. And then there's someone who's actually, let me go see if this is actually true. What is that process? What does it mean to walk spiritually? So then the conscious, just relating that to the point you were saying of the expanding consciousness, that we should always keep our minds and consciousness in that mode of wonder, of seeking, of looking, of searching. And then we'll get further and further. That's the simple secret.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much. It seems like to the extent that I don't care, then I'm not receptive, and then I just justify my lack of activity through various means.
Yeah, it's usually how it goes. it's the care that's the first thing that we don't see, and then we have so many reasons for not doing this and not doing that. But if you really desire and care, then the only thing to do is to try to find out for yourself if you really do care.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. I was feeling a lot of encouragement and confirmation and reassurance listening to your class. And especially when you spoke about that how Srila Prabhupada just mentions again and again that it's possible for us to fall in love with God. And yeah, recently in the Bhagavad Gita course, we were in chapter 8, and at the end of in the last purport, Srila Prabhupada also writes how we get like exchanging on listening about Krishna in like-minded association, we get really, it gets more and more joyful, and then naturally the next step is we develop love for God. And so I just feel so inspired, and like my faith in that is growing, and it's so amazing that here's someone who's saying yes, it's actually possible in this life, in this body, we can fall in love with God. And I also appreciated what you shared about I think that's how I understood it, how we can develop our finer senses to also sense or sense the divine energy, or maybe the internal energy. And it's very confirming for me also in helping kids grow or accompanying kids in their growth, to make sure that their senses are protected from too heavy impressions. Also for myself, to protect myself, so that the senses are not over stimulated and go numb, but that there's the finer senses can develop. So thank you. I feel very inspired. And I have one question. You were speaking about, and I just want to clarify, is it 3 aspects that should be there in every philosophical explanation? You were speaking about Sambandha, Abhidheya, and Prayojana.
Yes, that Prabhupada says every sound, philosophy should have these 3 components. They should be very strong in discussing these 3 things. Like, right, if you go into maybe some spiritual place, and maybe the first question should be, what's your goal here, first of all? Mm-hmm. What is your goal? And maybe some people don't even have an answer to that. And that's interesting, right? It's like, well, if you don't have a goal and that's not very, very clear, then there's not going to be a very clear process. The information is lacking, perhaps. So every sound philosophy will have all 3 of these categories will be very strong: the knowledge, the process, and the goal. And so we hear everywhere in our, in all the purports, the goal again and again and again, and the process again and again and again, and all the knowledge is so much is there. So these 3 things, if we're going to do anything or follow anything or consider philosophy at all, we should think, okay, is this person or this group or this organization, I want to make sure that these 3 things are very, very, this is good for a seeker, right? Someone who's actually seeking, making sure that these 3 things are in place and very strong before we accept something.
Yeah, it seems very practical also for anything we do. Like if I search for a job or a place to live or a community or whatever.
Yeah, sometimes we just have to ask ourselves, what do I want here, right? The first thing, what is my goal? Get clear on that first. And sometimes we're walking around aimless with no goal, and it's hard to get something done that way, but get clear on what we want. I remember when I was in college, I was reading Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita at that time, and that's all these new thoughts were coming in a new direction for myself, and I was considering all that. And I remember sitting in my room one evening and just thinking, what do I really want, like in life? You know, like I'm pursuing something at this university basically because I have to. You know, it's kind of like after high school, you go to you go to the university, and I'm choosing to do this at the university mostly because it's expected of me because I've already started something. You know, I was studying piano, classical piano, so I had a so it was you know, it was expected of me. I had my teachers, my parents expect, okay, go to college for that. But I was thinking, but what do I want? And I realized, you know, answering that question, I was not aligned with what I want. You know, what do I want? It was very simple. It was like, I want love, true love, and I want it to last. And and I realized nothing in my life is going in that direction. So how can I get that? I want it, but I'm just gonna, if I just, you know, hope that it comes one day, suddenly comes to me. So then it really just changed the whole course of my life. And I had to make sure that, okay, I want this, let me learn more about it. And then what's the process towards it? You know, so yeah, these three things are so important to always consider and focus on for ourselves on the spiritual path.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna. I have a question. Mrs. Malini.
Krishna.
I really felt stimulated by your class, Ghanashyam. Thank you very much. In the purport at the beginning of the part that you read, it said, this transcendental devotional service of the Lord is so wonderful that the occupation keeps the deserving devotee always wrapped in psychological activities without deviation from the absolute touch. And you know, I'm curious about the word psychological, what it means. And recently we are reading in the light of the Bhagavatas. There is where Prabhupada speak about introspective, someone with introspective, and that introspection is internal life. And when we are wrapped in that internal life, we also connect with the internal energy of the Lord. So, you know, I hear like love of God, and it's lofty kind of goal. And yeah, pure devotional service is for certain people that are very rare. And at the same time, it seems in those sentences, at least I'm hearing something that's more meeting me where I am at, where that introspection or that psychological absorption is just like possible by just questioning or looking at my thoughts. So I'm just curious about that wrapped in psychological activities. Can we, you know, see it like, oh, it's only the pure devotee, or can we also bring it to our level?
Yeah, that sentence also caught my attention when I was reading this purport. I'll just read it again. This transcendental devotional service of the Lord is so wonderful that the occupation keeps the deserving devotee always wrapped in psychological activities without deviation from the absolute touch. You know, how I understood this is the absolute touch is the key, because there's already a touch, there's already a contact with God. Then the devotee's service and planning of the service and all the psychological activities that are surrounded, that are also accompanying their devotional service. In one sense, that devotee is safe because of that touch, because of that contact with the absolute. So in other words, you know, like, and you've had experiences of Krishna and that touch has taken place. And that's the key. And now other things that we do with our mind, our desires, you know, like you said, introspection and other things that take place now, there's still no deviation. It's still within the realm of the absolute truth. So the psychological activities of the mind, Prabhupada sometimes speaks of, means three things: thinking, feeling, and willing. These are the, our thoughts, our feelings, our willing, our desires. So for the devotee who's performing devotional service and they're in contact with the Lord through that devotional service, then the activities of the mind devotees always wrapped in psychological activities, so absorbed in service that they're always thinking, they're always feeling, they're doing so many things psychologically without deviation from the absolute truth. In other words, they have nothing to worry about. They won't be deviated if they're firmly fixed in a devotional service of the Lord. That's how I understood it. So I think once we do have experiences of Krishna and Krishna consciousness, and that contact is actually made, then the activities one performs, there's a certain protection. The mind, the mental functions, the mental activities, there's a certain protection from that, where one still is not deviated from the lower level. And so those are just some thoughts and my understanding of that. Those sentences. I don't know if anybody else has maybe some insight or thoughts on that as well.
Thank you. I appreciate your response.
Yeah.
Like to be absorbed in the absolute truth, like somehow, chanting or, reading or cleaning or whatever, to have wrapped psychological activity connected with the absolute truth. It doesn't need necessarily with Krishna as a blue boy. Yeah.
Mm.
Like if
Right.
there is absolute touch there, like that's what we were speaking about yesterday when we had people come out of victim consciousness and like come to a place of personal responsibility, in the sense they are opening themselves to that absolute level. And then they are touched by the absolute level on some, it's not without deviation, but in that moment it's without deviation. Like when, like without deviation also, I was wondering, what does that mean? That without deviation on my level, not, I understand pure devotees or, I took here pretty is constant, but like without, in those moments of deep introspective opening of the mind, of seeing the absolute truth, well, it seems that there is, those moments are without deviation, even if the next moment completely deviates and goes away somewhere else to the external energy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I remember I'm sorry.
In the sentence it says the deserving devotee, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, does that mean necessarily pure, but someone who's sincere? And I'm really connected. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ghanashyam, but
No, please.
yeah, I'm relating to what Mother Malini's sharing. Because prior to Krishna consciousness, I was definitely wrapped with psychological processes in a search for truth. It was like subjective, like, who am I, and also what is the nature of humanity and how can we liberate humans? I didn't really think of it as like soul on the soul level, but how can we be who we truly are? And I was really committed to that for probably like 13 years before encountering Sapatov, which encountering Sapatov was very close to like encountering Krishna consciousness and opening to a relationship with God. So thinking of I think even all those psychological processes had an absolute touch. I feel like they completely guided me to self-realization on a soul level. And so anyway, I'm connecting with what Mother Malani said, and then I'm just pulling out the word deserving. Not that I'm saying I'm so deserving, okay, but I am getting transcendental knowledge and a process and a goal in mind and all of this. Like it has come into my life. So yeah, it's just piecing it together from personal experience.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the absolute touch, you know, for me, from what I understand, we can learn many things from different psychological knowledge and information. Something like Sattva Tov has the absolute touch. It's been because the background and the connection and the desire and the motive of all of it is coming from Krishna consciousness. All right, you know, dear Govinda Prabhu and Malini and just the whole effort, the whole motive. That's kind of like it's in there as the motive and the desire. We want to help people. So that is the kind of touch, the absolute touch that's not always there in other places where there's some work that's being done. But the absolute touch, it means it has to be touched to something that's absolute and not relative. Because even the psychology of the mind, of course, there's there are the modes of nature, and the mode of goodness is surely better than passion, and it's better than ignorance, but it may not be touched by the absolute, and therefore it doesn't liberate one, right? So something like, again with these verses, and I mean these sentences in the purport, and again, like lots of things are happening in Sattva Tov, psychological activities, so many things, but there's an absolute touch, and therefore the whole thing is blessed. And the way I saw no deviation is that it's not deviated by whatever, like whatever you have to get into, whatever you have to do, you're not deviating, because the intention or motive behind all of it is the absolute touch, and the absolute touch is present in it. That's kind of how I took it. Not sure, but when I saw this, I took it as like Prabhupada says, this transcendental devotional service of the Lord is so wonderful that the occupation, the work, within it, the occupation within devotional service keeps the deserving devotee always wrapped in psychological activities, so they're absorbed whatever is happening without deviation from the absolute. They're staying connected to that absolute touch, whatever is going on, because of the power of that devotional service. And I would say the motive as well, the motive of devotional service.
I want to present a little challenge that there is absolute touch in other organizations that might not talk about God at all or even spirit at all. I think there can be like really powerful touch from Krishna in those other groups or processes, and not all of them, but some have so much good and so much good intention, so much true transformation. Not that, and I know it can be like a zero, with a string of zeros without that spiritual, without the spiritual element in a sense. And that's my experience in other personal growth organizations that I was a part of, that nothing really changed until I included God in my personal growth. That's true, but in the overall like journey of the soul, when the soul encountering like that subtle organization that's focusing on transformation of the mind or the emotion or healing, or there's so much healing that can happen, that, and if think of it as a journey of the individual, then like Krishna's touching, I think, many people outside of a spiritual focus.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like sometimes there are breakthroughs just in our consciousness through it doesn't have to just be, definitely not meaning it in like a sectarian way, but the idea of like sometimes the background of different, psychological methods, there could be very deep spiritual principles that are connected and that are helping one along that awakening process. And so, yeah, there definitely can be experiences like that where one sees it totally connected and sees it as Krishna guiding me from, earlier in life with this experience, that experience. And then the contact with a pure devotee, it just opens it up in a whole other way, in a whole nother level. So much more becomes possible. And yeah, thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Hare
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Nice to be with all of you. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Ghanashyam. Love your class.
Hare Krishna. Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.